Yeah, so today we're going to be doing a video on wave sequencing and adaptive wave sequencing. We're going to go ahead and cover three examples. The first example is going to be non-responsive wave sequencing against Kassadin, and we're going to talk about what we can do in order to get proper lane states versus certain champions in order to give us advantages inside of the mid lane. And then finally we're going to talk about adaptive wave sequencing, which is going to be conversation happening between two mid lane champions and then adapting relative to what the junglers or top laners or AD carry and supports end up doing around the map. Anyways, let's go ahead and get right into it. Okay, so for this first example, we're going to be looking at a high tempo opening. This is going to be with high tempo jungle players that are able to attack mid lane at 2:30 and 3 minutes. It's going to be push on wave 1, push on wave 2, bounce on wave 3, and then depending how jungle actually ends up playing out, it's going to be either push on wave 4 for priority or bounce on wave 4 for a defensive opening early on. Anyways, so let's go ahead and take a quick look at how Anivia actually plays this out early on. It's going to be Anivia versus Kassadin, so we are going to be, again, this is a basic video, so we're only going to be looking at conversation between one champion and not the second, mainly because champions like Kassadin, champions like Katarina, champions like Fizz, these champions that are similar dynamic can't actually respond and hold a conversation early on, and mainly because they have no influence on the wave. So right off the bat, we're going to go ahead and see Anivia actually just go ahead and queue the entire wave, and this again is a very high tempo opening with push on wave 1. And again, we are just going to space against the Kassadin as much as possible, and we're going to try to harass him under tower because Kassadin can't actually respond. Kassadin in this case just wants to farm. And again, here we go. We're just going to go ahead and push again on wave 2, and we see that Fiddlesticks is on Kassadin's left-hand side. I'm not sure where the jungler is on Anivia's side, but we're not going to talk about that yet. And now this is where the subtle thing actually ends up happening, where as you can see, as we pushed in wave 1 and we pushed in wave 2, we actually ended up aligning the wave, the third wave with the second wave. And so now what's actually happening is the third wave is going to lock here. Slightly. It's not going to lock, it's going to actually collapse here. And as the wave clashes here for a very short time, as these minions end up dying, the next wave, or the third wave, will actually end up meeting around this angle. Now, what this is going to do is it's going to allow the fourth wave to then push in. Wave 4, again, is not exactly at 315, and really towards the end of the clear on wave 4 is when 315 actually ends up happening. And so we actually open up a very good timing for a immediate gank at 2:30 and 3 minutes in. And again, this is a high tempo opening for junglers that are able to attack Kassadin between the minutes of 2:30 and 3 minutes. Sorry. As you can see, the clash actually ends up meeting right over here, meaning that the fourth wave will end up reinforcing the clash first before Anivia's fourth wave ends up arriving. And so the wave's actually going to bounce right into Anivia. And so now what ends up happening is, as you can see, the game timer is 2:30. And again, this is not like an exact 2:30. There are estimates, you know, it could be like 2:28, 2:31, 2:34. It depends on how fast the waves actually end up aligning. And where they actually end up aligning. And so as you can see, what's going to happen is now the wave is going to end up arriving into Anivia, where now a jungler between the minutes of 2:30 and 3 minutes can gank. And then finally, depending on a jungle aggression, we want to see if we want to push out or simply bounce on wave 4. Now, as you can see, wave 4 is actually coming in. Now, what happened in this replay is Anivia actually pushed in. And so, unfortunately, we're not able to actually see, I'm not going to show you exactly what ended up happening in the video, but let's say that the opponent jungler starts on the left-hand side, and the opponent in this case would be for Anivia. So let's say, let's actually put it in colors. Let's say blue side jungle starts left side, and Anivia's jungle starts onto the right-hand side. And so, as we know that because there is an opposite side clear, there will be no aggression early on inside of the river. And so we can push on 1, we can push on 2, we can bounce on 3, and then we can either bounce on 4, or we can push on 4. And that only depends on where the jungler is. Now, because the opponent junglers, hypothetically, let's say, are starting on the opposite sides of the map, meaning that the jungle who's starting on the right-hand side will end left, and the left side jungle will end right. This is, again, basics, so we're not assuming that there's a vertical or anything crazy happening inside the jungle. And so what actually is going to end up happening now is, because there's no early aggression with junglers, and let's assume that both junglers are actually on Scuttle Crab at approximately 315, and so no vertical journeys, I guess, into between mid will, no jungler is going to double crab the other. we can just assume that the next wave on 4 should just be played over here, which allows Kassadin for a Kassadin will actually get ganked really easily. However, if the opposite is true, and it's actually a high tempo, there's going to be aggression, let's say on the left side or the right side, and let's say both junglers end up starting onto the same side of the map, and so we can assume that there will be a 315 collapse, assuming that both junglers are able to duel each other and top lane is also able to assist on both sides. Then what ends up happening is, instead of bouncing on 4, we actually want to push on 4, because by the time that wave 4 ends up arriving, we can simply push out 4, lock Kassadin inside of the wave, and then assist on the left-hand side Scuttle Crab, and this is also relevant for any right-hand side takes that the opponents might attempt to do. As you can see, we can actually go ahead and see how this ends up working out. Now, Anivia is pushing in, and this is why the wave is actually where it is, right? But had Anivia autoed a little bit less, wave 4 will actually be played here, and what's going to end up happening then is now Dopa, who is on Kassadin, there is a slight gank opportunity that is possible, and again, it would be between, I would say, 2 minutes to, not even 2:30, it'd be more like 2:45, 2-3, because the wave does actually have to end up arriving in the third wave. Simply meeting here isn't enough for the jungle to just simply gank Dopa. It has to be over here, and so we have to wait for the fourth wave to end up arriving, and then obviously a gank will just simply happen. But yeah, this is going to be the first example for wave sequencing, and then we're going to go ahead and move on to the next one. Again, just a quick note about this opening. Just wanted to quickly cover this so there aren't any, Reddit challengers that end up criticizing me. Even without you can also get the bounce back and still move in for scuttle fight. So let's say, for example, that wave 3 ends up locking here, and even if wave 4 ends up arriving, you don't even actually need priority sometimes. And priority, again, is just something that would benefit you if you were versus more maybe like Katarina or maybe like Fizz, because then those champions can't really they're forced to be locked inside of the lane. Obviously, if you just simply retain the freeze early on at wave 4 around this angle and then move up, it also could allow the enemy Katarina or enemy Fizz to also move up, and then what would end up happening is the assassin may actually just be stronger in the duels, and so you might just lose. However, versus Kassadin, doing this opening is just so much easier. But again, it does depend on the jungle 2v2, it does depend on the priority up to top lane, and you just want to be aware that even if a freeze does end up occurring and you allow yourself to, instead of pushing on 4, to actually bounce on 4 and allow the wave to be played over here at wave 4, at around 3 minutes, 15 seconds, 320-ish, you could actually end up walking up while retaining the freeze. So again, this is a very dynamic way of playing the game, but the purpose of these openings is to essentially tell people that there is such thing as wave sequencing, and wave sequencing is what will get you to higher MMR. Okay, so for this next example, we're going to go ahead and see a topic that isn't really covered much. This is slightly more advanced, but we're going to talk about changing wave sequences. And we talked about certain wave sequences that we need to have, like pushing on 1, pushing on 2, pushing on 3, etc. But sometimes things don't work out, and sometimes we have to change our game plan, or sometimes the junglers actually end up doing certain things. And so we now have to actually end up changing our sequence relative to what's happening around us. And so again, it's a big misconception when people assume that, you have to push 1, you have to push 2, and you have to bounce on 3. It's not stable. It depends on every situation, and then training yourself to be able to actually adapt to these situations is what will make you a better player at the end of the day. Now, here we're actually going to see Dopa versus Cassiopeia, and we're going to talk about Dopa's game real quick. So again, here both champions do want to play for level 2. Cassiopeia does want to play it a bit slowly because she is starting E, and we see Dopa just simply throwing out red card. And let's actually notice what is happening on the map. We see Lee Sin moving to the left side river. I believe that Elise ended up also starting onto the right-hand side, so there will be early left side aggression. If Elise actually ends up starting left side, then we'll see what ends up happening. Then Elise should just show back onto the right-hand side. So now, as you can see, both champions are simply pushing for level 2 here. Cass is autoing. Dopa is trying to entice Cass to use mana, perhaps even have her push into him and then simply match the wave. Yep, it's actually exactly what's happening. And now what Dopa is attempting to do is he's actually giving HP up in order for the second wave to build. And as the second wave ends up building into Dopa, as you can see, he's positioning himself really close to the minions, so that Cass is enticed to hit and actually ends up locking on wave 3 here. And now Dopa's in a really good spot. So now all we have to do in this sequence is we push on 1, and then we attempt to entice Cassiopeia to push into us at 2, and then we lock and match at 3. So at this point, on wave 3, at 2 minutes and 46 seconds, we see that Dopa is simply just consistently attempting to match wave clear to keep the lane somewhere in the center here, and this is just so good. And now Cassiopeia is going to be in constant pressure, because now in order for her to actually unlock wave 3 and wave 4, she's going to have to use mana, and so because she uses mana and cooldowns, this allows Dopa to find openings to actually start winning the lane against her, because she doesn't want to play the lane so far up. And again, as you can see, now right here, we see Elise showing up into top lane, and it seems like Lee Sin and Elise are actually fighting. Now notice how Dopa immediately changes his sequence. Now the idea early on was to actually simply push on wave 1, have Cassiopeia simply push on wave 2, so we have to win on wave 1. If Cassiopeia can get the push on 2, we can match on 3. So if we match on 3, we force Cassiopeia to use mana and resources in order to break 3 and 4, but now the situation has changed. We notice that Elise is on the left-hand side fighting Lee Sin, and now we don't want Cassiopeia to end up responding on wave 4, and so now immediately we're going to simply hard shove, and you see Dopa immediately just changing his sequence and throws out the wild card and starts hard shoving into Cassiopeia and then moving up as well to simply evaluate the fight happening. As you can see, Warwick also trying to do something while Renekton is locked in lane, and this again is actually keeping Cassiopeia inside of mid lane, and this is just so big. And again, this is just one example of changing your wave sequence depending on what is happening around you. Okay, so this is going to be the third and final example of the basic wave sequencing video. And again, here we're going to do a classic matchup that almost everyone has heard of. It's going to be TF versus Fizz. However, it's going to be a little bit different. Again, we're going to be talking about how wave sequencing can actually end up changing. Again, we're going to notice Dopa on TF versus Fizz, and we're going to see that he actually waits to see if Fizz will auto level 1, and if Fizz does auto level 1, then what ends up actually happening is the sequence becomes freeze on 1, not freeze on 1, sorry, but let 1 push in to us, and then freeze on 2. Freezing on 2 is really big, and obviously if Fizz doesn't auto, then we slow push on 1 and 2, so we build 1, we build 2, and then depending, maybe we even build 3, right? We have to see what ends up happening, and then we bounce accordingly. Now here again, Dopa gets the early tempo in lane, goes in red cards, also ends up hitting Fizz, and this is all very standard. Fizz ends up responding with an E, and again, Dopa moving in because of the cooldown being blown. And now, again, we just are slow pushing the wave. We're not going to talk too much about jungle opening, and this is actually really big. Notice what Fizz ends up doing when he does actually end up Eing onto Dopa here. Actually, instead of letting the wave just come into him, he actually ends up thinning out the wave and matching the wave clear even. So now instead of pretty much slow pushing, we're actually really just going to last hit now. Now instead of wave 2 actually going into Fizz and slow pushing wave 2, we're going to actually just simply keep the wave around the center. And by doing that, there's really nothing that we really have to actually do, because look at the minion waves. We have 3 casters, 4, 5 reds versus about 3 blues. And we're not going to count this one because this one's just practically dead. Sorry, 4 blues. So now because there is a +1 red side advantage and there's a very small HP discrepancy between the 2 minion waves, we actually just can keep the wave in the center, and we can entice Fizz to actually just hit us again inside of the wave. If Dopa ends up losing HP, but Fizz ends up hitting the minions here and skewing their HPs anymore, what's going to end up happening is Dopa can keep the lane here in a very, very nice spot, and then he can obviously keep the lane state and do whatever with it until he wants to recall for the catalyst. So again, as we can see, doesn't actually hit the entire minion wave. Sorry, the screen just split screen there for a minute there. Doesn't actually end up hitting the entire wave. Notice what he does. Avoids these 2 minions while hitting Fizz, and then gets the CS, and then again playing lane standard. And now as you can see, he doesn't actually push the wave. He doesn't need to do anything. The wave is actually even in the center, and now Dopa just keeping the wave here. And this again is changing wave sequence, and the only reason Dopa is allowed to do this is because Fizz keeps autoing, and you notice how the red side wave, the 3rd wave and the 4th wave, is actually building into Dopa. Now instead of actually slow pushing on 1, slow pushing on 2, slow pushing on 3, or maybe even bouncing on 3 and then crashing for a 4 or 5, depending on how fast Dopa actually wants to crash the wave relative to what Olaf and the opponent jungler want to do. And then playing the lane here. Instead, what we did is we slow pushed on 1, slow pushed on 2, but noticed that Fizz was actually just crashing the wave into us constantly, and then we actually started just matching wave clear on 2 and 3, and then as 4 actually ended up arriving, this is the 4th wave coming in, we're simply just going to keep the wave here. So at the end of the day, we wanted wave 4 in a very good spot, and that's exactly what ended up happening here. But it doesn't really matter which sequence you actually ended up taking, as long as you have the correct outcome at the right time. That's all that matters. And as the opponents actually do certain things and they attack the wave, you can change your game plan and wave sequence accordingly. Anyways, that is it for the video. That was the video on wave sequencing and wave adaptability. I hope you guys learned something, and again, be very careful with these concepts. Be able to have the fundamentals before you start applying these concepts in your own games, because it just doesn't matter if you don't know how to actually last hit minions. So again, these concepts are essentially like formulas. However, every single equation is different and every situation is different, and so you need to be able to know which formula to put in which situation, and this in itself requires a lot of training. If you have any questions about the video or any concerns, comments, you can always ask me in Twitch chat at twitch.tv/zenedu, or simply go to my personal Discord and ask there. We also offer free coaches and paid coaches. Anyways, thank you guys for tuning in. I will see you guys for the next video.